This morning, I started the sermon with a riddle that I came up with in my mind somewhere up I-60 driving from Dothan yesterday, or last night rather, in the rain. Phyllis and I were on our way back from Dothan, where I had performed a wedding ceremony. And somewhere between Montgomery and Birmingham, as I thought about the sermon for this morning, I thought that this riddle might be a good way to get us started in this very important study. And for the benefit of those who were not here this morning, the riddle was this: all of us need it, but unless we have it, we don't get it. What is it? All of us need it, but unless we have it, we don't get it. Well, the biblical answer is mercy. We all need mercy. And I made reference to The Merchant of Venice, written by Shakespeare, in which, to paraphrase his words, we're not looking for justice, for if justice is served, none of us will see salvation. What we need is mercy. And then I pointed out to you from the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 23 through 35, that Jesus said that if we don't have mercy in our hearts toward people that offend us and sin against us, God will not have mercy toward us. And this morning, Greg Harper read to us from the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus taught his disciples the manner in which to pray. And he said, pray in this manner: forgive us our debts as we forgive those who sin against us. And the only part of that prayer about which Jesus made comment was that part, stating that if we do not forgive one another, then God will not forgive us. And I also pointed out to you this morning that Jesus rebuked the Pharisees because they neglected mercy, a thing which he called a weightier matter of the law. They were very particular about tithing and those things that he named that were herbs, and he said you're very particular about sorting all that out and counting it out so precisely, and then you omit the weightier matters of justice and mercy and truth and so on. And I said, is it possible that we're guilty of the same thing? And toward the end of the lesson this morning, I said to you, we all recognize that this is a matter that we struggle with from time to time. I read some time back about a mother who had pleaded for so long and so passionately with her daughter not to do what the daughter said she was going to do. She had announced to her mom that she was going to leave home and she was going to the big city and there live alone. And the mother knew that she didn't have a job prospect or skills that would get her a job. And she was so afraid that a young girl in a big city that way might end up surrounded by sin and involved in sin. And surely enough, that is what happened in this story. And I sat there reading that and thought,
selected screen recording button.
How would you forgive that young lady? It's what the mother did. She said, I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've been involved in. You just come home. And then I realized, well, that's a mother. And what mother and what daddy would not have that kind of forgiving attitude? Some probably would not, but most would. And it's the picture of the father of the prodigal son in Luke 15. Although his older brother was so self-righteous and resented the fact that his daddy gave a party for him when he came home, the father was so compassionate and forgiving, which is a picture to us of our Heavenly Father and the way He treats us. But what about in our daily lives with each other? What if it's not a son? What if it's not a daughter? What if it is, as I surmised this morning, a drunken driver that takes the life of a loved one? What if it is someone who sexually abuses a loved one of yours? How do you forgive? How do you get through that moment, that challenge of forgiving, when loyalty and trust are betrayed? And it may not be something quite that involved or intense, something of that magnitude. It may just be that daily challenge when somebody says something or does something that just really stings and hurts, and they ask you to forgive them. How do you do so and go on and act like the hurt is over? Act like it didn't take place. It's a tall order. God has commanded us to do that. And I don't think any of us, now this is just my thinking, my feeling, I don't think any of us have to struggle with this every day, but I don't think any of us get through life without having a real struggle with it at least a few times. There comes that point when we're challenged. I remember one time, and this has been a long time ago, another place, another time, and none of you would know this person. He had a nickname, and that wouldn't identify him either, so I'll just use the nickname. His nickname was Mac. Mac was a member of the church, and he had a problem. And in the weakness that he had to a certain temptation, he gave in frequently. And when he would realize how wrong he was, he'd come down the aisle on a Sunday morning and he'd make another confession and ask the church to forgive him. Well, one Sunday, Mac came down the aisle again. I don't know how many times that was. Maybe a dozen. And when the service was over, I heard a person sitting near the front turn to a friend and say, "Well, I sure hope he means it this time." And I thought to myself, you know, there's probably no one in this congregation who has trouble relating to what that person said. But I also thought how wrong that person was. First of all, to say such a thing, even if she thought it. we may have the temptation to stand in judgment against someone like that. But you know what I thought about? Was the passage that Fred read for us. Old Mac had been before us about a dozen times in about 5 years. But Jesus said, if he comes before you 7 times in a day and asks you to forgive him, forgive him. And that's the struggle for mercy and forgiveness that we're dealing with tonight. And what I want to do in this session tonight is present to you some things from the Word of God that are practical, some how-to, some helps in how we can grow in this. And the very first thing that I want to bring to your attention about how to grow in it, how to develop this is the word reflect. To reflect upon how God treats you. The Apostle Paul utilized that very method when he wrote the Ephesians in Ephesians 4, verse 32, when he said, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. See, Paul there stated, this is the reason that you forgive one another. This is the thing that is in your mind, that as God has forgiven you of your sins, becomes a reason for you to in turn to forgive one another. And I realize that there are times when we feel like that I just can't do this. But when that time comes, that's the moment to just stop and think. Boy, how many things has God forgiven in me? But David, what if it is somebody like Mac? And they just keep doing the same thing, and it just keeps happening, and it just keeps going. It seems to be a pattern developing here, and they just do it over and over and over and over. Do you remember what Jesus taught in Matthew 18, verses 21 and 22? Peter had a question for him. He said, Lord, how often shall I forgive my brother? Till 7 times? And what was the answer of Jesus? Peter, no, not till 7 times. But I say to you, till 70 times 7. 490 times. Now, if any of you in here tonight have had that experience, I'd like for you to come and tell me about it tonight, that you've had to forgive somebody, regardless whether it's the same thing or not, forgive the same person 490 times in your life. Now, there might be some wives or husbands who are automatically going to say, yeah, I've been there. And I guess we have. We lived together very long. But that wasn't Jesus' point. 490 times wasn't his point. His point was that it doesn't matter how many times the sin or a sin is committed or the person has done wrong, when the person truly says, I'm sorry, please forgive me, you and I have an obligation to forgive. And it's not our place at that point to step in and judge. It is our place to forgive. This really links to some other things that we're taught in the Scriptures. One of them I made reference to in my sermon last Sunday. wrote the Galatians in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, when he said, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in fault, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted." And the question arises sometimes, how far do we go in that effort to restore someone? How long do we bear with somebody who is not a faithful Christian, and then we can't seem to get them to come back and be faithful? How many times do you go talk to somebody? How many times, how long, over what period of time do you extend your energies and your prayers in behalf of this person? Maybe right here's the answer. That as long as there seems to be a penitent attitude, Jesus says forgive, so maybe there's a principle that's established. That as long as a person seems to have an attitude of wanting to do what's right, we bear with them on and on and on and on and on and on. Now, if there's no attitude of trying to do right or wanting to do right, no evidence of remorse, no evidence of trying to do better, that becomes another matter. And maybe there comes into play the thing that Jesus taught elsewhere when he gave his apostles instructions, saying, there'll be some times when you'll be preaching, and it'll be a time for you to shake the dust off your feet and move on. Because it'll be obvious there's no interest. And back to what we're talking about more immediately here tonight. When I stop and think about the things that God has forgiven in me, and how numerous the sins are in my life, then I'm led to this thought. If God has forgiven all of that in me, surely I can forgive you when you sin against me, regardless of what it is. And as that song that we sang just a little while ago reminded us, they spat upon Jesus. They were so abusive to Christ. And what did he say? Luke 23:34 says, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And that came from a man who was hurting so badly. He was hurting physically from a beating that left him at the point of death. But I think he was hurting more emotionally. And he agonized because he knew he was on the brink of going into the Hadean realm alone, severed from God, and to bear the pain of the guilt of the sins of every man and woman who ever lives on this earth. And I can't even imagine what that would be like. And there he is making this supreme sacrifice, giving himself for a race of sinful man, and all they're doing is walking in front of the cross, mocking him, ridiculing him, laughing at him, spitting at him, and just in general having fun with him. And out of his heart and out of his mouth, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So I really do believe that the most powerful and effective thing to practice when you come upon, and you may not be dealing with it tonight. Maybe it'll come tomorrow, maybe it'll be next month, maybe you've just gone through a situation like this. But when you come to that moment that just hits you like so hard you just have trouble putting it into words and have trouble forgiving, just remind yourself of what God has forgiven in you. And when you just run out of patience, just remind yourself, aren't you glad God doesn't do that with us? Boy, I mean, you think about, if I were God, and I certainly don't mean to be sacrilegious or irreverent even in suggesting this, but if I were God, frankly, I'd have given up on you and me a long time ago. You know, of all the sins we commit, how awful for God to just say, David, do you know how many times you've asked me to forgive you in your lifetime? I mean, how many more times are you going to fall, and how many more times are you going to stumble and come to me and ask me to forgive me, or for me to forgive you? Oh, I'm so glad God doesn't do that. I'm so glad that the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5 reassured me that God has more grace than I do sins. The second thing that I want to suggest to you from the Word of God that really I think can help you is the word understand. Understand that God does not expect the impossible of you, that it is an achievable thing. I read in Hebrews 8:12 that God said regarding the Israelites that He would be their people. I mean, He would be their God, they would be His people. And He said, "Of their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more." And when I read that, I think, well, that's God. But I don't have that ability. Now, I can go to my office and erase things from my computer. It has a memory. And in that memory are some things very important. And there are some things that occasionally come in there that are useless, and I don't want them in there anymore. I can erase those, eliminate them, they're gone. The computer has no knowledge of them being there. My mind is not like a computer. So when you sin against me and I forgive you, what if that comes to my mind? You see, I can't be like God and say, I will remember it no more. Maybe I will remember it, but I remind you that God is not expecting the impossible of us. What He's commanded us needs to be understood. To forgive someone doesn't mean that it will never come to your consciousness again. But what it does mean is that when you forgive, you're saying, never again in my life will this offense, now forgiven, affect the way I treat you. I may recall it. I can't keep that from happening. But I will not permit it to affect the way I treat you, because the way I treat you is an action, and I am in control of my actions. I am in control of my words, and I can choose my words and I can choose my actions. And in that same regard, I've heard people say, well, I'll forgive the person, but I'm not going to have anything to do with her anymore, or I'm not going to have anything to do with him anymore. But see, that person doesn't understand forgiveness either. Because once again, a forgiven offense is not going to affect the way you treat the forgiven person. You're not going to be hateful, hurtful toward anybody if you are Christ-like. And I know that I'm talking about something that is a difficult challenge, but once again, compare it to God. Aren't you glad God doesn't treat you that way? Aren't you glad God doesn't say, well, okay, I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to have anything else to do with you? The next time you need me, I won't be there. Isn't the grace and mercy of God amazing? It really is. It's just absolutely amazing. Somebody ought to write a song about amazing grace. If you didn't get that, come to me afterwards. I'll explain it. The third thing that I want to suggest to you tonight about how you can grow in this quality of mercy that enables you to be forgiving toward those who sin against you is the word decide. Turn your Bible to Colossians chapter 3. I want you to look at this text with me. Colossians chapter 3. The Apostle Paul wrote in this chapter about the new man in Christ. And he talked about qualities that we've had that we no longer are to have, and qualities that we maybe have not had but we're now to have. And he talked about them in the context or in the analogy of putting on clothing and taking off clothing. That there's a new man and he's going to be clothed a certain way that's different from the way he used to be clothed. Pick this that context up at verse 5 and read with me. Now, mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience, in the which you also walked sometime when you lived in them. But now you also put off. See, there's the concept of like you take off a piece of clothing that you're going to discard. You put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him, where there's neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Now watch verses 12 and 13. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, and forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Well, that just seems to crystallize the whole thing that we've talked about this morning and tonight. That he just says, in the church, face the reality that we're not all going to please each other all the time. There are going to be times when we're going to say and do things that hurt the other one, or that we're going to disagree and we're going to have clashes and conflicts over things. And in our struggle with evil here on this earth, here we are, as the song says, but straying pilgrims. 1 Peter 2:11, I beseech you, strangers and pilgrims, in our struggle from earth to heaven, getting there together, along the way, we're going to, shall I use our phrase, get on each other's nerves. And we're going to upset one another occasionally. But he said what you have to do there is take control and don't allow wrath and malice and strife and envy and all those things to pop up. That's the devil's tool to get you distracted from your goal. You just remember how Christ has forgiven you, and if any of you has a quarrel against the other, forgive each other. And be long-suffering, and be filled with kindness and mercy, and the ability to be patient while somebody is struggling, and forgiving, and therefore you can encourage one another. Let me tell you that as a preacher, I need that. Let me tell you that as a Christian, as a husband, as a father, I need that. The ability to be patient and kind and merciful and long-suffering with imperfect people. And I just need to be more like my Heavenly Father, and you do too. But you know one thing that comes to my mind out of that text? That's a commandment. And if it is a commandment, and God does not command the impossible, if he requires it of us and he doesn't require that which is out of the realm of possibility, then it's a matter that I have control over. I decide to be forgiving. The ability to forgive is not something a person is just born with. It's not just a wonderful little quality that some people have and other people don't have. Forgiving and being merciful is a decision that one makes. It is the result of exercising one's will. It's directly related to I think one of the greatest needs in our society today, and that is to accept responsibility for our behavior. Rather than wanting to blame somebody else for what we do. Well, I'm in control of that. I'm in control of my behavior, so I'm in control of my choices and my decisions. And I can either choose to be merciful or choose not to be merciful. I can choose to be forgiving or choose not to be forgiving. And my Lord said, I want you to be like me. I want you to choose to be forgiving. I want you to choose mercy. And don't be so quick to jump up on the judge's seat and start condemning everything that you see in other people. That doesn't mean we compromise the truth. It doesn't mean that we lower the standards of morality. But it means that we understand that we're all human. How did that little riddle go? We all need it, but we don't get it unless we have it. And you're not going to get it from God unless you have it for one another.
Open controls.
Open your songbooks, please, to the number that has been announced.
Focus button selected. Screen